Hello, and welcome to the second class in the series for the Jedi Path Academy Learners program. The date is June 16th, 2020. And this class is a little timely, more than I anticipated when I planned this last month. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the Jedi Response to oppression. And the date's important because not only are we living through a time of a global pandemic, but also a time of uprising where people all over the world are protesting oppression, specifically oppression against Black lives. But we're going to be talking about all the intersections of oppression tonight. And so we're going to be talking tonight about what the Jedi response to oppression is. So tonight's class, the Jedi Response to Oppression, Jedi Path Academy Learners program by L. Christopher Bird. That's me. So you deserve to know who's teaching you tonight. My name is L. Christopher Bird. I began walking the Jedi Path in 2005 by asking why not. I was inspired by the Jedi census phenomenon, where people were putting Jedi, I assume as a joke or some political statement, down as their religion. And I just wondered, why not? Why can't that actually be a religion? And I wrote an essay where I thought what being a Jedi would be like in the real world. And from there, I started putting it into practice. 6 years later, I created the website JediPath.org when I thought I had enough of a handle on this Jedi thing that sharing my views, my thoughts might help other people be quality Jedi. And I've been running the site since 2012. It's gone through a few iterations. And now it's the hub for the Jedi Path Academy, where we gather and train and discuss in real time and have classes like this. In 2017, I was knighted in the organization known as California Jedi at a gathering. It was kind of a big deal for me. The knighting standards can be found at the website californiajedi.org to see just what that means. I'm not going to go into it too much, but what it really means is that more responsibility. Being a teacher, which is this is part of my night work. This academy and this class, and being a knight means more responsibility, more work, and yeah. So let's dive into the content. So we're talking about the Jedi response to oppression. And to talk about oppression, we talk about the nature of power. So what is power? According to Michel Foucault, power is defined as the ability to make meaningful choices about one's own life. A lot of people have a lot of different definitions for power. For this class, this is the definition we're using: the ability to make meaningful choices about one's own life. And when we use this definition, I think it's clear that some people have more power than others. There are some people that have more choices available to them by circumstances of their birth or their class, their skin color, their sexual orientation, their gender identity. Some people hold all the cards, and some people are playing with a stacked deck, and while others have a lot less choice. So now we're going to talk about 2 ways that we can use power, and that is power over versus power with. And power over is the power of oppression. Power over removes choices. I think all of us can probably think of things where that applies, and we'll be discussing that soon. Power with practices protection and empowerment. That's where we try to get people to be able to make more meaningful choices on their own life, where we use our power for the benefit of others and working with others. That's power with. And so as Jedi, it's my view that Jedi should use their power to defend and protect. That's the archetype of the Jedi Knight. Defenders, protectors. And we should use our power in that way, to protect people, to defend others. And so for this slide, I'm going to open it up for a discussion. See if anyone has any thoughts on the nature of power. Are there any raised hands, Brandon?
No raised hands yet.
Okay, so is silence assent, class? Are you taking time to think of ways to disagree with me? Well, I guess we'll just keep going through the material. Oh, okay, it looks like Eleanor has raised her hand that I can see. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Eleanor, and talk. You're gonna have to unmute your microphone.
I've always felt that I had quite a bit of power to decide for myself what I would do and how I would think, because people didn't like me when I was a kid in school. And I quickly figured out that trying to please them didn't work because they wouldn't like me anyway. So I just gave up on the whole business of socializing. And there are lots of disadvantages to that, but I'm sort of happy with it because I like being the way I am. But now I know, having lived for a while and run into a lot of people, that I actually have influence over other people. And that sort of shocks me. I don't want to. And if I have influence over other people, I have to be careful how I'm influencing them. And so I'm in this class.
Great, thank you, Eleanor. Yeah, this ties into the Jedi concept of our sphere of influence and how we use it, where a Jedi or any person is at the center of their own sphere of influence. And it expands out from us. And within that sphere, we can exercise our power. And we can choose to either have power over or power with. And it's all about the ability to make choices. So is there anything else before I go to the next slide? Anyone?
Christy has raised her hand.
Great, go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of follow on with something Eleanor was saying about being uncomfortable with power. And I have that feeling too. And I used to not have very much power in this world because I had an economic disadvantage and an educational disadvantage. And just over the past 10 years, those situations have changed. And now I find that I do have more influence and people do listen to me more. And I resent that. Because why wouldn't you listen to me when I was poor and only had a GED after my name? You know, why won't you listen to other people who are in those positions? You know, why are these people elevating me? I'm not the one who needs to be elevated. And so I've done some kind of self-sabotage things that to knock myself down a peg in those circles. And I want to, as part of my Jedi path, I want to develop better control over that and learn how to do that with intention and in a way that is an intentional surrender of some measure of my power or privilege for the purpose of elevating people in more marginalized communities.
Right, that's exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about power with. Exactly right. All the participants in this class tonight all have places of privilege, it appears, and it's about how we use that. So, are there any other comments before I go on to the next slide?
Nothing in the chat and no hands up.
All right, next slide. All right, so now we're going to talk about the part of the Jedi response, which is based in compassion. And what I mean by compassion is that it is the desire to lessen the suffering in others that is the root of Jedi compassion. And now this is an exercise for the participants. If a Jedi is led by compassion, what is their role? And where does compassion lead a Jedi in the face of oppression? So compassionate action is what we're talking about. Not just feeling pain because of the suffering of others, but the action of doing something about it. So I want people to give their opinions. If a Jedi is led by compassion, what is their role? Where does compassion lead a Jedi in the face of oppression? So what's our role? Where do we go? Who wants to go first? Okay, it looks like we got a couple
And
hands.
Eleanor's has a hand.
I think Trikenia went first. I think Trikenia had her hand first.
Oh, I'm sorry. The hands are popping up in different places tonight. Okay, sure. We'll go with Sir Kenya and we'll just hold Eleanor for a second.
Go ahead and mute Eleanor for a second and have Trikenia go.
Okay, so could you repeat the question now? Because I got all confused about the hands.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, so if a Jedi is led by compassion, what is their role? Where does compassion lead a Jedi in the face of oppression?
Okay, for role, I would say that it's a Jedi's responsibility to act within their sphere of influence, to change things in a positive direction, right? So, I mean, I have a voice and have people that I can influence in a positive way, and I'm responsible to do that rather than stick my head in the sand and avoid it. As far as compassion leading a Jedi, I mean, if our role is to alleviate suffering, then we need to go where the oppression is and try to alleviate suffering. However, I will say that you have to be very careful when you're not the one being oppressed to discuss with that community and find out how you can help them best, and not just go in like some hero and try to save the day, because what they need might be not what we expect.
You are anticipating the next slide, believe it or not. Or a future slide. Thank you. Is there any more, Turkania?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, who's next, Brandon?
Now would be Eleanor.
Eleanor, go ahead, please.
What is my role if I'm trying to lead by compassion? I think the first thing I have to remember is to listen to the people I'm trying to lead. And I like that because I'm not the type that likes to stand up in front of a class and lecture. I'm the type that wants to run a graduate seminar where everybody is learning together. And my problem is that I have ADHD and am not very good at figuring out what other people need. I have to be rather open about asking about it because I can't figure it out.
Yes, very good.
Where does compassion lead me in the face of oppression? First off, I have to make sure I'm not oppressing anybody. I have to be aware of my own biases. I've run into a couple since I got a caregiver. And well, one of the things that I do is I wear a darker than mine skin in Second Life, not only to show solidarity, but also because I think Black people are more handsome. I thought that when I met my first Black person in 3rd grade, and I've believed it ever since. So I enjoy being dark in Second Life.
Okay, thank you. Who's next?
Next is Lucy.
I'm going to agree with everybody that's spoken since I'm last. Well, I don't know if I'm last. If you're being led by compassion, you really do need to listen to what's needed. And see and ask the people who you're helping what they want from you. Mostly it's going to be support at that point, because I've been on both sides of this issue. And, I've been on the front lines because it was me who was being oppressed. And I was empowered by my community. But I had to also educate my community as to what my issues were. And when I'm turning around now, I see the oppression on somebody else. Based on my own experience, understand this. And so one of my roles also, where this may go to where it leads, is helping to educate. When I'm reading the books and getting woke or whatever, I need to educate other people or help educate other people in my circle at that point. You know, because there are people who will listen to me because of who I am. And I do have, you know, those real life examples that I can put down and say, this is what happened to me. This is what needs to happen now. But it can't be me on, like, with a microphone right now because I'm just a white girl. But anyway, I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. Is there anyone else, Brandon?
No.
Oh,
Breeze
wait.
just raised his hand.
Breeze, go ahead, please. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm reminded of this guy named, his name is Robert Greenleaf, and for some time he was a college professor, and he took a group of very, very well-meaning university students into Appalachia to meet the people that were living in the Appalachian Mountains, who were, among other things, destitute. And one of the things that they decided to do, because they met this older woman and her house was dilapidated and probably a little bit on the dangerous side, they knocked it down and they built her a brand new house, which, as far as they were concerned, was this lovely, generous thing that they'd done, except that they did it kind of as a surprise. So the ta-da moment comes, and she starts crying, and they don't understand why she's crying, and she says, it's lovely that you built me a house, but you burned down my home. And Robert Greenleaf's response to his students was, are you hearing this? That, you taking the lead by deciding you know better, deciding you understand what the person needs, but not stepping back to, kind of humble yourself and say, yes, I have tremendous power, but do I have, commensurate insight? He wrote, among other things, a book called Servant Leadership that I highly recommend. But yeah, they were sort of with the best of intentions, kind of running roughshod over this lady, that even meaning well, in the absence of sort of requisite humility to listen and to use their power to serve, was ultimately kind of dangerous.
Yeah. Again, everyone's anticipating a future slide, which is great because it means we're on the same page about what the Jedi response should be, and that is to listen. So if there's nothing else, I think I'll go to the next slide. And this one is called Jedi Respect All Life, which people will recognize from what is commonly called the Jedi Creed, sometimes the Skywalker Code. But let's get into it. So respect for other people can be expressed by accepting them just the way they are. We do not seek to mitigate or erase aspects of others that are part of their identity, especially if they are not aspects which we ourselves share. Excuse me. We respect that the experiences of others may be quite different than our own experiences, even if we find ourselves in the same environment. The insistence that we are alike where it counts is an attitude that only comes from a place of privilege, and is something that Jedi should be mindful of. The experience of a person that is subject to oppression is often due to a trait that matters very much to them, perhaps an immutable aspect of their makeup which they cannot walk away from, and puts themselves in stark contrast from the people around them. So this is the slide about what we most commonly see is color blindness, saying I don't see color. You know, but this can go for other axes of oppression, where we insist, usually as white people or straight people or cis people, that the differences are inconsequential. But in our lived experience, when we have these axes of oppression, it's very important. It may even be part of our identity. And it's not something that can change, and it's not something that should be erased. So that's this slide. Much of what we talked on the last slide is probably the next slide. But this one is not invalidating people's lived-in experience, not ignoring this immutable aspect of someone's makeup. It's very real, and it's a reason why they suffer oppression in the first place. And so we don't seek to erase what makes us different, but we realize that we are equal in our differences. And so I'm going to open the floor. Is anyone's thoughts or observations or questions to this slide? Anyone? I see Eleanor had her hand up.
Yep, Eleanor's hand's up.
Okay, it looks like I'm unmuted. This sounds just exactly like the training I had to be a life coach. Life coaches say the client has all he needs to become the person he wants to be, and that he does not have to change anything if he doesn't want to. And I really identify with that. And when people have tried to make me change or said that I was not right, I've resented it, and I don't want to do that to anybody. And now I think I'm a little bit better at catching myself when I do it by accident. When I make assumptions about people from my point of view that don't fit them. It's hard not to do that.
Thank you, Eleanor. Who's next?
Next is Breeze.
Breeze, please go ahead.
There we go. You know, it's funny. I've said that a million times. You know and I'm usually talking about sort of a spiritual truth rather than a practical truth. You know, that we are fundamentally similar in some sorts of like essential ways. You know, like we all get old, we all get sick, we die. You know, that kind of stuff. And it's hard to say that, you know, without sort of making ownership of the fact that it's like, we have fundamental similarities, which is not the same thing as being identical and interchangeable, while still making room for and we are not treated the same. And you're different, and the differences are, I have trouble with that one, because I recognize differences between myself and my fellows, but I also know that there are fundamental truths about being, I'm a living being, and on that level, it's hard to draw that line, because that line gets muddy and seems to move, and so it's certainly difficult to use that phrase in conversation, because we are all fundamentally the same. Starts running into the sort of I don't see color thing of I'm unwilling to recognize the very thing that's causing you to get hurt. Not that your color is causing you to get hurt, but other people's response to it certainly is, and that's it's so fraught. And I've wondered, how do you communicate in such a way that leaves room for complexity,
Right.
Because I absolutely don't want to take anyone's themness away from them, it's funny, not to run too far afield. I've been reading J.K. Rowling's various defenses of her position, and I'm not going to defend her. I don't think that it's valid, but the thing that I keep reading in her defense is, don't take my meanness away from me. That she seems to feel sort of under attack, like something is being taken away from her, and I would argue that it isn't, but that fear of don't take what makes me away from me is pretty universal, and yet certain spiritual truths about people are immutable. And so how do you balance that in a way that allows for sort of practical communication? I'm not entirely certain, again, JK's wrong, but I'm just identifying with her gripe.
Right. Yeah, nothing is being taken from her. So, yeah, you're right, Alex. You're correct, or Breeze. I'm sorry. You're right, Breeze. That that there are essential similarities, but the things that cause us to be treated differently,
right,
can't be walked away from. And
yeah, absolutely.
And like if we were to say to a black person, well, I don't see your color, there's nowhere a black person can go where they're not going to be black.
Yeah.
And they're not going to have the response to that happen to them. It's not something they can put down. And I think it's harmful to invalidate that experience.
Right. And that's kind of what I'm saying is, like, how do you respect certain truths that operate on a very grand scale, while respecting truths that operate on a more personal or societal scale,
Right.
Because what's true on what's true on one level is not necessarily true on the other, except that, again, saying, I'm going to invalidate your blackness by suddenly, stepping out onto the macro level where none of us really operate is, not okay. It's a hard thing to. I struggle with this.
Yeah.
How to accommodate these two ideas simultaneously.
Yeah, nuance is hard, but we can contain multitudes. We can contain both truths at the same time.
Right, that's the trick. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. That's meaty, and I think that's more than what this format will allow us to really dive into. But I'd really like to dive into this later and maybe create another essay out of it or something like that. Some work come out of it. But I'd really love to explore this with you, Breeze.
Yeah, there's a certain paradoxical nature to it that frustrates me.
Thank you.
Anyway,
All right, who's next?
Next is Turkenya.
Sir Kenya, go ahead, please.
So I agree with Alex that there's this tension between understanding that the other person is a human being and should be treated like a human being, you know, and I think that the otherness is what a lot of people have difficulty with. And if they can just relate to somebody at a certain level where they can connect, then they will understand that that other person is a human being and will respect them, right? But at the same time, being somebody who's non-binary, I understand that it's not something I can change, right? It's an immutable aspect of myself, and it constantly others me. And in order to not have that experience, I would have to declare that I'm something that I'm not. And that is an important, you know, like I could, but then I'd be lying. I'd be living a lie. So there is this odd thing where people just don't relate to me because I use different pronouns and because they don't understand what that means. You know, like, what do you mean you don't identify as either? There is no such thing, right? But at the same time, if they saw me as a human being, they might relate to me and not have this problem. So, you know, I'm at a loss as to, I'm with Breeze. I feel very frustrated because trying to hold these two views at the same time is just difficult.
Yeah, it's a sticky wicket for sure, definitely. Thank you. Did you have anything else for Kenya?
No, that's it.
All right, who's next, Brandon?
Next is Lucy.
Lucy, please go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to muddy the water. I've dealt with this as a trans feminine person who wanted nothing more than to just be treated the way I wanted to be treated and put it all behind me. Just live my life. But there is something about me that will never change. You know, my past defines who I am today. And things just don't make sense if you don't know stuff about me, about my past. You know, it's one of those things where, like, I just want to be treated like a normal human being on a day-to-day basis. But when it comes down to it, there's things you almost need to understand about me. And that part of me just, I don't want to put it away sometimes. You know, it's like, this does define who I am.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, going on trans history, you know, it used to be that when a transgender person transitioned, they did something called fading into the woodwork. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
We call it stealth.
So, right.
Basically what happens is I feel like I'm living almost exactly the opposite lie I used to. If I try to put away completely that part of me, I feel like I have to hide my past from people. You know, I can present good, and if I can, you know, if I'm awake, my voice sounds better, and, you know, I can fool people. You know, I'm putting air quotes around the word fool. I'm not fooling anyone. This is who I am.
Right, but
I'm gonna lose my train of thought.
Yeah, to continue what I was saying is what they would do is they would transition, and then they would move to a new city. They would cut off contact with their family and friends. They would build a whole new life, get a new job, maybe in a different arena, like like a different kind of job than they had before transition, and never admit about their transition or the previous life.
Yeah,
And
you're hiding just like you used to hide.
Yeah, and it's a terrible thing. I think acceptance is better. I think, everyone is free to make their own choices, and that's a very individual choice. And this is my, I'm under the trans umbrella for being non-binary, but I was assigned male at birth, and I'm masculine presenting as a demiguy. But so my experience is much different, a little bit easier. But yeah, you have to live your truth. And again, we're equal but different. Our differences do not make us unequal in the fundamental sense, like what Breeze was talking about. And fundamentally, we're equal, but being equal does not negate what makes us different.
Right. I think one of the things I saw when I came, because I came fully through this, spectrum to the other side, and experiencing life from the other side, I realized how much of a construct a lot of gender-related things are. It's completely societal bullshit. And it brings me back to where, just to be, I don't want to be just normal. So I want to be out there in who I am. And how that relates to like today's issues is people don't need to be assimilated and conform to any standard. Don't. People just
Yeah, that's very good. It's like we don't want to be segregated. We don't want to be assimilated. We want to embrace our differences and be treated equally while still being different. I think is the goal. I'm not perfect on this, but that's my imperfect understanding.
No, I'll agree to all it's hard. It's hard for me to deal with how how things should be as somebody who's like in the thick of it. And it's not easy. So I'm not going to talk all night. That's pretty much all I wanted to throw in.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else, Brandon?
And that will bring us back to Breeze.
Breeze, please go ahead.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Lucy and Turkenia were saying, it's as a biracial person, I present as white. I know, I know what I look like. And I have had the experience of people both angrily, yelling at me that I'm white, as though I've done something to hurt them, by suggesting that I'm otherwise. But I've also, almost worse are the people who, they're like, well, yeah, but it's okay, you're white, as though by claiming me and effectively cutting off half of my identity, they're doing me a favor. So this is an act of generosity. But this is something sort of essential to my person, and yeah, it's people have a very hard time. The white people who have gone ahead and done this have had a very hard time grappling with the idea that I didn't necessarily think there was anything wrong with them. I just didn't see myself as one of them, and did not want to be mistaken as one of them. Like I'm not you. I'm not like you in many ways. And to try to claim me and take me in is to erase something about me that is important to me. and it's very hurtful. And the part that's always very confusing is that the people that are saying this very rarely understand why I'm upset. Like, they don't understand why I'm not just going, okay. You know,
I'm sorry. I don't think laughter is the appropriate response, but
nervous laughter is fine.
it's
a weird kind of, it would be like somebody saying, well, you have a wife, so, for now you're straight. And it's like, no, that's not who I am. And that breaks trust, and it hurts. Having a part of you erased is painful, even if the people who do it don't actually have the power to do it.
yeah.
And yet, I coming back to something as absolute as the Force. I keep coming back to this apparent this apparent contradiction, right? This paradox. It's a very frustrating place to live.
Yeah, and I think the best thing to do with that is to sit with that uncomfortable feeling and go ahead and be uncomfortable with that and learn to be okay with being uncomfortable, not being able to solve it. We're not here to solve it. We're here to accept it, even though it does seem contradictory. At least that's my view. You may be different. If you disagree, raise your hand. Is there someone else?
There is. We're going back to Turkenya.
Turkenya, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to say to Breeze that I totally relate to the feeling of being erased. As a female-bodied person in computing, all the time it's about being a token female, but I'm not. So I feel like they're constantly erasing who I am because they want to shove me into this box that fills some checkbox for affirmative action or whatever. and I can completely relate to that feeling.
Thank you, Turkenya. Okay, I think it's time to go on.
That is indeed the last hand.
Okay, so we're going to the next slide. Respect based on tolerance and advocacy of human rights. As Jedi, we will want the best possible outcome for the greatest number of people. This often happens by advocating for those that are being oppressed by those with power over. Jedi employ the attitude of service. Jedi do not rule over other people. We do not tell them how to behave and act, or worse, make them act the way we want. The attitude of a Jedi can be summed up by asking the question, how can I help? Oops. So, in today's world, June of 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, there was riots, looting, property damage. And a lot of people have a lot of opinions about that. And even today, I saw a white person saying how that's not the way to do it. here are the ways to do it, and listed all the ways that up to this point have not stopped cops from murdering black people. And if we're going to serve, those that are being oppressed need to be the ones that lead. They are the ones who choose how their oppression is addressed. And it's not up to us to decide what's appropriate and what's not. We do not share that axis of oppression. We let them lead, and then we advocate. We advocate. We use our privilege in service, not to have our own agenda of how we think the way things should be. But we serve. We ask, how can we help? And then we do that instead of going on with our own ideas. So, open up the floor for comments, questions, thoughts, meditations, what have you. Anyone at all?
May I speak?
Yes, go ahead.
So, along with listening, continuing education, I think, is paramount in order to serve in this way, because it's very easy to accidentally become the oppressor when one is not continuously aware of not only what their place actually is in an ecosystem, but what the issues that others face actually are, so they can know how to respond appropriately.
Very good. Thank you, Anna. Is there any other thoughts on this? All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide then. And this is the one we anticipated on the compassion slide. Listening as Jedi service. It is listening to those who experience oppression that is the first step to understanding their experiences. Power with means being led by those who suffer oppression instead of insisting on our own ideas on how things should be done. If we are acting from a place of privilege, we must seek not to deny or defend our privilege, but rather seek out how we can best use it in the service of others. So this is, next time I run this, I'm going to put this slide much earlier. Because we anticipated this several slides ago. So listening as Jedi service. In my own path, I've been a listener. And sometimes my experience as a listener to those I've listened with, they're grateful for just being heard and acknowledged. Just to say, yeah, I hear you, I understand. Or, I understand how you're explaining it to me. Like, we can never get inside someone else's skin and walk around for a while. So the best way to understand these experiences are to listen to those that experience them. So we're coming back around. Anyone have any thoughts, comments, or questions about listening as Jedi service?
No hands at the moment.
Yeah, like we did go over this, and did we not? We anticipated this early, so I think so. If there's nothing new to say, I think that's okay. Finally, is neutrality an option? On this slide is a picture of 3 women of color holding a sign. It has a quote from Desmond Tutu. And it reads, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." And I see this in the Jedi community a lot. In fact, it was this attitude, which is why I originally started talking about this topic, and where my output on the Jedi Path website started having a social justice element to nearly everything I write. But some will advocate for not taking sides, not getting political, saying that it does not apply to the Jedi Path. However, if we're going to play more than lip service to the concept of the justice, it most certainly does belong in the Jedi Path. Now, many of the participants here, some are new to the community, some are long experienced. I'd like to talk about what we see in the Jedi community on this topic of neutrality. Sometimes saying that Jedi have to be objective, or other kind of words that, I don't know, lets them sleep at night for not taking a side and being silent, or heaven forbid, playing the devil's advocate, which only helps the oppressor. Because when you're being oppressed, silence seems like assent, doesn't it? It seems like no one's coming to your defense. You don't think that the people lurking support you, because you have no support unless that support is given explicitly. So I'd like to open the floor, share experiences of what you've seen in the Jedi community, or your own views when you see neutrality in situations of injustice.
First up is Breeze.
Go ahead, Breeze.
Sorry, I'm chatting. I think what I often see is this sort of inflexibility, where both is sort of a difficulty telling a problem from an inconvenience, and a difficulty telling an opinion from a conviction. I use the opinions are for things like ice cream. And if one of you likes chocolate and one of you likes vanilla, I can safely not have a dog in that fight because nobody's getting hurt. And the trouble is that example will get trotted out, and then someone will say, well, therefore we will use the same principle in matters of conviction, because ultimately they're just opinion anyway. And that's I think where this, whether people do it out of a legitimate sort of deficit of understanding, or as a fig leaf, and that probably varies person to person. But I think that's the trouble, is that, Black Lives Matter becomes a matter of opinion. Trans rights become a matter of opinion. My right to have my identity is a matter of opinion. And I would argue not only is it not an opinion because it is a fact that it is both true and verifiable, but even having an opinion about that fact where my well-being and safety are involved, again, opinions are for ice cream, and then there's just respecting human beings, and I don't respect all human beings. I don't think that's an opinion. Opinions are they're like hair follicles. Everyone's got several million of them, but this is more important, And I think there's this weird thing where we try to make that, everyone's going to do what they think is right principle, and we shift it into situations where it's really not relevant.
Thank you, Breeze. Who's next?
Next is Turkenya.
Turkenya, go ahead, please.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I agree with what Breeze said, as far as convictions and opinions, but I also want to talk about the Jedi community and them wanting to pay lip service to things. I find that some people like the whole idea of being Jedi, but when the time comes to walk their talk, they're not interested. So it's easier for them to sit back and say, I'm just being neutral, than to actually have to put their money where their mouth is, honestly. And it seems a bit harsh, but that's what I've noticed over the years, is that they like to sit and debate and philosophize, but they don't actually like to live it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I saw a lot of that this weekend, where they're treating people's real lives, real lived experiences, real oppression that's happening right now as an intellectual exercise to have a debate over, to score points by making some point, sorry for the repeat of the word, but to make to have some position and back it up as if it's to win Facebook likes, and whoever gets the most likes wins, when these are people's real lives. And yeah, I do see this. I see this lip service to the idea of being a Jedi, as long as it remains abstract.
And if there was ever a time period in history that matched what was going on in the movies, it's now. Right? I mean, we have stormtroopers, police going and killing people. And if ever there was a time when the community should step forward and say, no, we're drawing the line in the sand, it's now.
Definitely. Thank you, Turkenya. Who's next, Brandon?
Up next is Anna.
Anna, please go ahead.
So something I've also seen is that a particular aspect of the philosophy itself can be interpreted to a response of, well, it's not our problem, or we should do nothing. An example is objectivity. We have to be objective. And so then things that are not opinions become opinionified, if that's a word. Another one is harmony. The idea that differing opinions are chaotic, and that folks should say follow the leader, and if a leader is neutral on these things, if they are siding with the oppressor, it has an effect on the entire community. And so these interpretation of this philosophy can sometimes cause just as much of an issue as a misinterpretation of it, or not following it at all. Although in my opinion, the way that I see objectivity used frequently in the community and the way I see harmony used don't fall in line with Jedi philosophy.
Very good. I agree with you 100%. I really do. Thank you, Anna.
I believe the next hand is Eleanor.
Hi. I keep raising my hand in the picture and people don't notice, so I finally typed it in chat. Hi. If any of you are Enneagram fans, I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. And the reason I'm a 9 is that I have all the faults of a 9, and one of the faults of a 9 is sloth. I really don't want to move and fight and so on. I really just wish everybody would be nice to each other and not make me having to go to any trouble. That being said, I write church plays about this sort of thing, and I write songs about this sort of thing. And I am sort of famous for liking two people that hate each other and telling one that they're wrong and telling the other one that they are also wrong, which is a real good way to get rotten tomatoes thrown at you. I don't understand why everybody doesn't love the differences because they're so pretty. I don't want everybody to be like me. I couldn't get along with somebody who was like me. I'm always interested. I always want to listen to people and find out what's going on. And I don't understand why the world's the way it is, and I can't do much about it because I can't even get up out of this recliner. But I agree that the Jedis should. And I guess I am one. Done.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you very much. Who's next, Brandon?
Next is Christy.
Christy, please go ahead. Christy, you're still muted.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. We spend a lot of time discussing individuals as oppressors, but I've started to look at systems of oppression and how individuals are conditioned to work within those systems to maintain the oppression on behalf of the real oppressors. And I think that neutrality is probably one of the most prevalent tools of that, because it's a safe way for people to not act. But as long as these systems of oppression continue to exist, inaction is supporting it. So I think that for us as Jedi to be effective, it would be wise to start focusing on the entire systems and how we can make change that way.
That is some really good insight. You know, yeah, silence supports the system. And oppression, as we know it, is systemic. It's built into our culture. It's built into our laws and the way that we run society. That we have oppressors and we have the oppressed. And Yeah, I'm blown away actually by your insight. It was really good because neutrality is the safest way to support the status quo. And those that do support the status quo almost always benefit from it. Maybe they're afraid to tear down these structures that benefit them, or at least not oppress them, which is, I guess that's a benefit. Yeah, very good, Christy. Thank you so much.
The next hand is Breeze.
Breeze, go ahead, please.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, you know, it's we do focus on, you know, what I'll refer to as bad actors. I think in part because they seem more manageable, you know, addressing the behavior of a person, you know, making sure that a given individual is, you know, censured or punished seems like a manageable task. But it's interesting because that actually kind of lets the system off the hook. You know, that when we focus on the actions of the bad actor instead of the system that underpins them and that they are essentially acting out, you know, it serves the interest of a destructive system to focus on its constituent replaceable parts. You know, and you know, and if we're working on ourselves, you know, this cuts both ways. If we're working on ourselves, saying, you know, I am working on becoming a more effective ally, I am working on becoming anti-racist, you know, and so forth, you know, to sit and beat ourselves up for our personal attitudes kind of misses the point, because it turns it all into just introspection, which is useful. And instead of saying, you know, what are the systems with which I am interacting? What are the systems in which I'm participating? And how can I, you know, act out on those? You know, I think it's, you know, always useful and good to have a good heart. But, you know, if I sit off somewhere in a cave to think my good thoughts, you know, what am I really helping? You know,
Right.
and I think also there's this sort of the Jedi notion of harmony is whatever the loudest voice is, you know, harmonize with the loudest voice instead of creating harmony by getting rid of the disharmony. And I think objectivity is often misunderstood, you know, as don't take a side, as opposed to objectively saying, this is not okay, you know, separate from how I fit into the system. You know, I benefit from racist praxis every time I participate in the economy. But as a person attempting to be objective on the issue, I still have to say, this is not all right. You know, that objectivity doesn't mean pretend both sides are equally valid. Objectivity is saying, I need to, as best I can, not think about how I benefit and just consider the rightness or wrongness. I think when objectivity is treated that way, it's a more useful pursuit. Rather than, it's not a state of being, but a more useful pursuit of understanding. But if it's just I'm gonna sit back and wonder, you know, I'm gonna pull myself out of the math entirely and say that, you know, I'm not gonna take a set, it's not useful, it's not helpful.
Right. Yeah, when we talk about political positions and being objective, there are political positions that are more aligned with the Jedi path, with what we're about, than their counterpart. There are political positions which are not aligned with what we want to do and what we want to achieve as Jedi. And you're right, objective doesn't mean being in the middle and not taking a side, but true objectivity can see where there are systems of injustice and say these systems of injustice need to be addressed or torn down. And a neutral position is not always the objective one, because sometimes something is objectively unjust. and we can all see it. And we have to have the courage to act. Okay, enough preaching. Who's next?
Well, the next two are close, but I think Lucy was first.
All right, Lucy, go ahead.
Oh, I'm going to try to organize my thoughts. I know in the Jedi, like especially in our training, we talk about, we like peace. Jedi are about peacefulness. We talk about Form Zero. We don't get violent unless there is absolutely no other option. And it almost seems like we're training to be passive. And one of my things is we have lightsabers for a reason. We are not passive. My train of thoughts all over the place. When it comes to this lip service thing, we've been talking about privilege. I have to agree, and like, no matter what's happened to me in my life, I've gotten to where I am because of my privilege. And one of the things that I have to be willing to do if I'm going to be more than lip service and on board with this concept of justice is I have to be willing to give up my privilege. And that is a very, very hard thing to think about. To be like, to lift someone else up, I have to take and be willing to do that. And I think that's a very hard thing to, because human beings, I think we're naturally selfish a little bit. We look out for us. And that is a mental hurdle. I think we just have to train ourselves out of anyway. I think I said all I wanted to say there.
Okay, great. I think the last thing you said is the important part.
Yeah.
We got to train ourselves or be trained to do this. And for me, the Jedi Path is all about training. In fact, that's how I get my my self-discipline. One of the pillars of self-discipline in gear is I treat things as training or a training opportunity. And once I get my mindset that, okay, I'm training, this is what I do as a Jedi, I can approach it as a training opportunity. And so as a Jedi, I think it's important that we're always learning, that we're always training, that we never get to the point where we just brush our hands and say, that's it, I'm as good as I'm going to get. No more need to improve.
Yeah. Like, in the game, we'll say we don't get involved in politics so we can be autonomous and make our own decisions as Jedi. In real life, we need to get involved.
Definitely. This is one place where the reality of being a Jedi in the real world differs than the fictional Jedi. The fictional Jedi of being apolitical doesn't pass what Opie McLeod calls the APB test. APBB. Is it applicable? Is it practical? Is it beneficial? Does it have a positive effect? I mean, just that last one, positive effect. Being neutral, being apolitical, has the opposite. So it shouldn't be part of our real life path. It should be rejected.
Absolutely. That's all I had.
Thank you, Lucy. Was there someone else, Brandon?
There is. Turkenia has their hand up.
Turkenia, please go ahead.
So first of all, I just wanted to take issue with the fact that the Jedi weren't political, because they actually were. I mean, they were rebels in the later, or the earlier movies, but the later movies, you know what I mean? And they were all part of this Clone Wars thing, right? So as much as they complained about being involved in politics, I think once the chaos got to a certain point, they had to step in order to create harmony, right? And I think that's for us too. I mean, right now the world is in chaos. The world is a dumpster fire right now. And if we want things to be in harmony, then we need to step up and do it, you know, plain and simple. The other thing I was going to say is about privilege. What I wonder is, so as a female-bodied person, as a female in other people's eyes, not a non-binary person, I have more privilege, plain and simple, because when I embrace who I am, I have less privilege. And sometimes I wrestle with that, because if I don't say anything about, you know, being non-binary and you know, don't make any issue with it, then I have more of a voice and I can make more of a difference. But at the same time, I'm selling myself out in those moments. And that is difficult for me to decide. You know, and as a Jedi, should I go for the greater maximum benefit, which is denying myself in order to help more people? Or am I true to myself and work within, you know, what lesser privilege I have?
Yeah. My thoughts is that if you take privilege, if you take false privilege, you're operating in the system. You're in a way holding it up, saying the system that bestows privilege on people not like me, by participating in it, it's almost like you're giving assent to it. I'm not trying to be critical. I mean, you got to.
Well, these are the things I wrestle with, right? It's like I want to be a voice for non-binary people, you know, because that's who I am. But then, you know, the system takes my voice away.
And that's what this is. This is a struggle. We're struggling. We're all struggling with these axes of oppression. Yeah, this is another thing to get into later in a different fora, I think, because this is a difficult one, and not one that this format is best suited to address right now. But thank you for sharing, Sir Kenya. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you. And who has their hand up now?
Next is Anna.
Anna, please go ahead.
Sure. So the real world is very scary. Earlier on in this presentation, a conclusion was reached that all of us have privilege to a degree. And yet we can see people that each one of us can identify as having even more privilege, like, you know, the billionaires, the people who have so much money, like they can send themselves to the moon. And they're scared too. It's like everyone is so afraid that I see, I'm saying everyone, but just from my perspective at least, there's an enormous amount of fear in the loss of privilege. And yet that's exactly what we have to do to make things more equitable for everyone. And I find that I have more privilege now than I have had, I would say arguably in my entire life. And I am just as scared of losing it as the very small amounts of arguably strong privilege I had, say 10 years ago or 20 years ago when I was much less empowered. And so I find that for me, the challenge is to recognize that fear and see it for what it is. And at least part of my training is being able to move past that as a goalpost every time. Because I don't think the fear of the loss of privilege, at least for myself, is going to ever go away. Even though my privilege eclipses the privilege of those that I can see on feeds like Twitter and on the news.
Right. So we're talking about fear of loss, which was the entire class for our first class, attachment and non-attachment, and how to let go of these attachments. And we got to think, is this attachment to privilege beneficial or is it harmful? That's a tough one.
Yeah, and in the real world, I mean, unlike the movies, we don't have medical droids. I bet the Old Republic had some great health insurance, for the Jedi there. The real world's a bit more scary in that regard too. It's terrifying.
Definitely. Yeah. We hold on to our privilege because we fear to lose it. But if we're committed to justice, we have to train ourselves to let go of it. We must. Not just for us, but for all that hold it, until we have a more just and equitable society. And that's one of the things that at this academy that we're working towards, to build that more just and equitable world. And to do that, to have equity, we're going to have to let go of our privilege. And we just have to. And who's next?
That'll bring us to Breeze.
Breeze, please go ahead.
At the risk of sounding like I'm splitting hairs, I don't believe that privilege can be lost. Certainly, I don't believe that privilege can be relinquished. I think the goal has to be that privilege must be shared. If I have white privilege, it's that my whiteness is never used against me. And I think that's the trick, is how can I make it so that a person's set of variables are not used against me? The only reason I think the distinction is important is because I've run into people, and I've done it myself, who have said, how can I relinquish privilege so that I can be one of the good ones, so that I can be a non-oppressor, right? Because if I have no privilege, I'm a non-oppressor. But the fact of the matter is that I can't relinquish my identity as an oppressor. I can't, much as I try. And my allyship and my efforts at allyship are they don't mitigate my identity as an oppressor. They are merely efforts to adjust the system so that everyone shares my level of privilege, right? It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it offers us an out. If I just sort of decide, in my self-satisfaction of like, well, I've given up my privilege, so I'm one of the good guys, then I'm not examining, I'm not examining the ways that I interact with the system, and I'm treating my actions as harmless, but they're not.
Right. So
ultimately, the goal is the same: to get everybody in the same place where they are just treated with the dignity of being a human being. But I caution against saying, I need to get rid of my privilege, because it opens us up to this delusion of saying, okay, well, now I'm harmless, right? And then we lose the onus.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Alex. And the language we were using was imprecise, and you're correct to make this distinction. When I say we got to lose our privilege, what I'm really saying is that we got to lose the advantage that our privilege gives us. And we do that by sharing the privilege among everyone.
Absolutely. It's not a criticism. It's just, we get our language shapes our thoughts, and it can lead you into a funny place,
Right. And really, we can't let go of our privilege on an individual scale. Like, I can't just say, okay, I'm not privileged anymore, because the system bestows the privilege on me and withholds the privilege from other people. So we can't, when I say we need to get rid of our privilege, it means we got to dismantle the system that gives it to us unequally. I can't not be white. I cannot not be male-bodied. These are things that give advantage to me in the racist oppressive society that we live in. And so you're right to make the distinction, and I agree with you 100%. To make it clear, when I say that we need to get rid of our privilege, means we need to dismantle the system that gives it to us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, who's next, Brandon?
We're returning to.
Okay, Anna, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, excellent point. I also wanted to add that as part of the dismantling, it's, it can be risky. And, I would say on this path, these are risks that we should accept. So for example, financial privilege, which is a side effect of, say, white privilege. If you were to give away all your money in the society, then you're on different footing all of a sudden. Perhaps you've changed the system a little bit, and that other people are a little bit more empowered now for having done that, but it comes at a personal loss. Likewise, stepping aside for someone so that they could get a position that you want or a job. There are aspects of our society that are competitive, and our privilege enters into that competition. And so I would say so you're absolutely right. And I would say also that how we fight and how we dismantle the systems comes at a cost. And though I will also say that the cost for for folks who are more privileged is, to me at least, it seems that it's always less than the cost the price that people pay who are less privileged pay for this dismantling. And that's why it's so important that folks with more privilege help to dismantle these systems.
Thank you, Anna. I think I saw Christy's hand go up. Is there someone before Brandon?
You did. Christy's next.
All right, Christy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on what Anna just said about how we work to surrender our privilege by dismantling these systems. Rather than, say, giving all my money away, how can I use that position that having that money gives me in order to dismantle those systems? And for me, that looks like local advocacy for policy that it's defund the police policy. Some groups that I work with are trying to advocate for more social services and more restorative justice programs and unarmed peace officers to respond to a lot of police calls. And that is a very unpopular idea, even in my very liberal UU church group. They don't want to hear it. They really don't want to have that discussion. People are immediately afraid when they hear those words, defund the police. They think, about the personal danger that they think they might face from that. But people need to be educated so they can understand. And that's a way that we can leverage our position of privilege in the society by speaking to people and providing that education, and by learning how to navigate, the halls of justice, and learning how to reach out to our representatives and advocate for legislation that has that effect.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you. I don't really have anything to add. That was great. Who's next?
Well, I want to check because I saw a comment in the chat that Eleanor had been trying to raise her hand but having some technical issues. So she would technically be next. I just want to see if she still wants to chime in.
Go ahead, Eleanor, if you want to.
Thank you. I think I hit that darn hand about 5 times before anybody noticed it because it keeps fading out. It won't stay up on my picture. I think the big thing that we are not talking about, or that we are talking about, but I'm seeing it from both sides at once, and that is scared. We are scared, but the oppressors are also scared. And they are reacting out of fear to vote for somebody like Trump. And what I would like to do is reassure people that they really don't have that much to be scared of. Because, okay, so we are all different and we have all been hurt. And we all get scared and we all hit out when we get scared, possibly. And some of us are self-disciplined and compassionate and good leaders and so on, and try to stem that tide, but everybody's scared. And when I go to somebody, and I did this in North Carolina a long time ago, I tried to help work with a group. I went to an Episcopal church, which is a nice place to go to, a Black Episcopal church, because I was going to a white Episcopal church, and we decided we would visit the Black church for a while. Well, I didn't want to just visit. I stayed for months. I stayed all summer when everybody else went home in the spring. And I did that for a reason. They were so friendly to me. They were so nice to me. What was there to be scared of? But I was scared when I first went. And I think when people are not scared, they're nice. So we need to work on helping them be not scared. That's the button I'm using, Brandon. And every time I push it, you know, what I see is a button called reactions, and I hit reactions, and it gives me a hand, and I hit the hand, and it goes on my picture like right there, and nobody sees it, and it goes away.
Okay, we could handle the tech in chat, Eleanor. Thank you.
Yeah. But anyway, something I wanted to say earlier, if I may.
Go ahead.
I don't understand. I never will understand. I want a bouquet of flowers to put in the vase. I don't want them to all be the same. I want them to all look different. And people who arrange flowers put in different kinds. Not as many as I'd put in, but lots of different kinds. And it's so much prettier that way. I don't see why everybody else can't see it. Okay, so I'm sort of simple. Okay.
Thank you, Eleanor. And I think Eleanor has a good insight here that oppression is a vehicle driven by fear. I think that's a true statement. And
Anger.
And I think what the oppressors fear the most is that the people that they have oppressed, once they share power with them, are going to turn around and do it to them. It's almost unimaginable for them to have a world without oppression. And a lot of the fear is to keep that power so that what they're doing to other people won't be done to them. But I think we got to imagine a world that is just and equitable, where no one has to oppress anyone else, where we all share this power with, and we give up power over. It's a big ask, but that's where we need to head. We need to head to a world without oppression, not saying it's our turn to oppress. It's a big thing. We're not going to solve it in a Jedi Path Academy lesson. But that's the world we're working towards as Jedi in this academy, towards a more just and equitable society where the need to oppress vanishes. All right, who's next?
That appears to be the last hand for the moment.
Okay, great. This is the last slide. I want to thank everyone for their participation. I'm so grateful that we've had this discussion. For those watching the recording, if you want to participate in classes like this, if you want to be on board with our mission of world betterment through self-betterment, these are the places you can go. I have my website, YouTube. I have my book. It's a Jedi 101 book to get started. We have a Facebook presence. And we're on Twitter, though not much of a fun on Twitter, but it's there. So I wanted to thank everyone. Just stop the share. I want to thank everyone for participating. I'm so grateful. Thank you for everything that was happening in this class. And I want to wish may the Force guide you and protect you always.